Three bows to the Buddha. First bow. Second bow. Third bow. And bow to the teacher.
Okay, let me just share screen. Okay, can you all see the screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
5 vehicles.
Yes. So let me just adjust this a bit. Okay, so another year. And it's really good to see all of you again and so many familiar faces. So good evening to everyone in the US and good day to everyone else around the world. So it's Sunday morning here and nice and early, but also quite cold. So this year's topic is the 5 vehicles, and in particular, the practices of the 5 vehicles. So just as a bit of a background for anybody who's new to the retreat this year, over the past few years, the material that I have presented comes from Venerable Yin-Shun's teaching titled The Way to Buddhahood. Now, back in 2022, I covered chapter 1, which was about taking refuge in the Triple Gem. And last year, my talk on the significance of learning the Dharma was effectively the material from chapter 2. So continuing with Venerable Yin-Shun's book this year, we'll be covering chapter 3 concerning the 5 vehicles and the practices that are common to all 5 vehicles in Buddhism. Now, chapter 3 is quite lengthy, unlike chapter 1 and 2. So with chapter 1 and 2, I was able to cover all the material in 4 lessons. But this year, I'm pretty sure I won't be able to finish it all. So there will be a to be continued for next year. Now, before we begin, I would like to review the structure of chapter 3 so that you can have a bit of a mapping of the content. And this way you can understand where things fit in, especially when we start to drill down into the details. So it's important to keep this mapping in mind when you're reading this text yourself, if you have access to it. So if you want the full detailed mapping, it's available in this book. I'm not sure if you have it or not. Some of you, I'm pretty sure has it. I don't know if you still have any available over there, Faye, but this is Venerable Tangzi's book that was produced back in 2015. Not 2015. Back in 2015, Venerable Tangzi's Dharma talk at the retreat covered the whole structure of the Way to Buddhahood from chapters 1 through to chapter 5. And the mappings are all available in this particular book. So if you want to have a look at the more detailed mapping, try and get a hold of this book, and it can be downloaded from the website that is available there. I'll put this up again in the break, so if you can't copy it down in time, don't worry. So now, the structure of chapter 3. So chapter 3 has 2 major parts, basically. And part 1 presents what we call the normal path of practice. And this is the significant portion of the material in chapter 3. Here you will find the righteous practices that one should study and undertake on their path to Buddhahood. In particular, the focus here is on the 5 vehicles. In part 2, what the material covers is the skillful means or expedient parts of practice. And here the details are of methods that help practitioners to consolidate their faith in the Dharma and to help them get stronger and eventually be able to undertake the practices of the normal path. Now, under part 1, the normal path, there are 3 stages. And the first stage talks about the establishment of right view and right understanding. The second stage talks about what it is that we need to learn, the righteous practices that all practitioners of the 5 vehicles should learn and should put into practice. And then stage 3 is about the core element in these practices that humans should rely on if they want to move in the direction of Buddhahood. Now, I'm hoping that within the 4 lessons we have over the next 4 days, I'll be able to cover everything in part 1, stages 1 and 2. Now, we may not completely finish all of the material in stages 2, but as a bit of a precursor to next year, we'll be covering stage 3 and part 2 next year. Now, after taking refuge in the Triple Gem and beginning to learn about the Dharma, one then needs to decide which path they want to take. Now, in the Buddha Dharma, in the Buddha's teachings, there are 5 vehicles. Now, the term vehicle is used to reflect the mode of transport that we adopt or we use for our spiritual practice. When we talk about the 5 vehicles, it is referring to the human vehicle, the heavenly vehicle, the Shravaka vehicle, the Pratyeka Buddha vehicle, and the Bodhisattva vehicle. Now, these 5 vehicles reflect 5 different types of goals. The human vehicle basically uses practices suited to humans to reach the goal of gaining the human form or being born in the human realm. Now, the heavenly vehicle uses practices to reach the goal of being born in the heavens. The Shravaka vehicle has practices that are aimed to help a Shravakayana practitioner reach the goal of arahathood. For the Pratyeka Buddha vehicle, the practices here help these practitioners to reach the goal of liberation. And in the Bodhisattva vehicle, the practices there are suited to Bodhisattva practitioners to reach the goal of Buddhahood. Now, although we talk about these 5 vehicles and they have 5 different goals, under the Mahayana teachings, the 1 vehicle teaching, all 5 vehicles can be used to reach Buddhahood. So someone may have the aspiration to just practice the human vehicle, but it doesn't mean that that's their only choice. So under the Mahayana teachings, you can start off at the human vehicle, the heavenly vehicle, even the Shravaka and Pratyeka Buddha vehicle, but all of these, if the practitioner chooses to, can be converted to the Bodhisattva or the Buddha path. Now, when we mention the 5 vehicles, when you read about the 5 vehicles in the Buddha's texts, although it includes the Bodhisattva, the Shravaka, and Pratyeka Buddha vehicles, when we talk about the 5 vehicles, please bear in mind that the main focus is on the human and the heavenly vehicles, Because when we specifically want to refer to the Bodhisattva vehicle or the Shravaka Pratyeka Buddha vehicle, often you'll hear the terms the three vehicles, or in the case of the Sravakayana practices, you'll hear about the two vehicles. So when you read about the five vehicles, please bear in mind it tends to refer a bit more to the practices of the human and heavenly vehicles, which are like a foundation practice that all five vehicle practitioners should be equipped with. Now, in the Buddha Dharma, there are rankings of lower, middle, and upper level paths, and these are based on one's aspiration or goal. So the lower level path is characterized by the aspiration for a better future and cultivation of the standard human or heavenly practices. When we have a goal to seek rebirth in the human or heavenly realms, then this path is called the human or heavenly vehicle. Now, these paths are the Buddhist practices shared with worldly religions. For example, the Confucian beliefs are very similar to the human vehicle practices, while Taoism, Christianity, and Islam, these type of religions are very similar to the heavenly vehicle practice. The human and heavenly vehicles are also, as I mentioned, the foundation for all five vehicles. So they also provide the foundation for the noble transcendental practices. And that's why in this book, The Way to Buddhahood, Chapter 3 is called The Practices Common to All Five Vehicles. So even though we have these rankings of lower, middle, and upper, when we talk about the lower level paths, we must not look down on these practices because they provide the foundation for the middle and the upper levels. So what this means is that those who cultivate the three vehicle practices must also equip themselves with the virtues of the human and heavenly paths. Even though one may not seek the result of a human or heavenly birth. After all, if we think about it, if a practitioner cannot even develop the virtues of a human, then how can we develop the virtues of a sage? Now, the question may arise, given that other worldly religions can also yield the results of a human and heavenly path, that means if you practice the other religions, you can also gain a human birth or birth in the heavens, then why should we choose the human and heavenly paths as taught in the Buddha Dharma? Specifically, why must we take refuge in the Triple Gem and cultivate the five vehicle practices as taught in the Buddha Dharma? Now, to be clear, the Buddha Dharma does not, say that you must take refuge in the Triple Gem and cultivate the human and heavenly vehicle if that's what you seek, if that's your goal. However, if one does take refuge and cultivates the five vehicle practices, their path will be more stable and they would have also entered the gates of the Buddha vehicle. So what this means is that somewhere along the path, further down, if you wish to progress further, you can then directly embark on the transcendental path. In contrast, if one follows other worldly beliefs, though they can also gain a human or heavenly rebirth in their next life, they may miss out on accumulating wholesome karmic connections under the guidance of the Triple Gem. And in some cases, when such people want to embark on the transcendental practices to gain liberation, they are unable to link the teachings very well because they lack the past practice and guidance from the Triple Gem. And because of following otherworldly beliefs, they may even experience some hindrances. And an example is of people who have developed unnecessary attachments or very strong religious biases and views. And these can create obstacles to the development of right view and their spiritual progression. Therefore, for those seeking a human or heavenly rebirth, it is much better to take refuge in the Triple Gem and to cultivate according to the Buddha Dharma than to follow otherworldly beliefs. Now, the first verse in chapter 3 says, "One who sincerely believes and takes refuge should cultivate right views and cultivate right livelihood. Then progression will not be hard at all." So remember that in part 1, stage 1 of the structure of chapter 3, stage 1 is to establish right views and right understanding. And if we refer back to the Noble Eightfold Path, the very first path is also right view. Now, after taking refuge in the Triple Gem, we are a disciple of the Buddha. In terms of knowledge, we must develop right understanding about the Buddha Dharma and establish our right views. In terms of practices, we should begin to cultivate a right livelihood. The Buddha once said that a person with right views and right livelihood is hard to find. Concerning these two aspects, if we can accomplish both, then progressing to the transcendental levels will not be hard at all, let alone attaining the goals of the human life or heavenly life in the future. Now, right view refers to a correct understanding. In Buddhist context, view and knowledge are not the same. View is a firm position arising from inference, and so when you have right view, this involves a conviction and a conscious selection of wholesomeness. When we learn the Buddha Dharma, we must establish our right view. And this is analogous to going on a holiday. When we go on a holiday, we must have a good understanding of the journey and have conviction that the route chosen will lead us to the desired destination. Now, the reason that view and knowledge are not the same is because knowledge does not always become right view. An example, excuse me. An example is Galileo's study. So when Galileo conducted his own research and study, he concluded that the Earth orbits the Sun. Now we can consider this as knowledge. For the sake of his conviction in this knowledge, Galileo withstood persecutions from the Church. Now this is what is meant by view. In contrast, there were other people who may have come across Galileo's research. So they had contact with this knowledge, but it didn't become their view. So I hope you can start to see the difference between right view and just knowledge. So when we study the Buddha Dharma, we should take our knowledge of the Dharma and continually practice it until it matures into a steadfast right view. Right view includes worldly right views, and transcendental right views. The practices of the 5 vehicles are within the scope of worldly right views. Now, even though right view is only at the level of a steadfast and unwavering conviction, the strength it yields is very powerful. This is described in the Samyukta Agama, Sutra 788. It says, "If in this world there is one who possesses right view, though they cycle through thousands of lives, they will never fall into the evil realms." Now, I hope you can remember this, because in the past I have been asked, aren't you scared of falling into the hells in some future life? Or how can you be sure that you're not going to fall into the 3 evil realms? But when a friend of mine asked me that, it occurs to me that even though he had been a Buddhist, so to speak, he had been a Buddhist for most of his life, he still hasn't really established right view. He probably still hasn't had enough right understanding of the Buddhist texts and teachings to establish his views. And that's why he has this fear. And that's also one reason why he tells me he's always stuck with his practice. So when we learn about the Buddha's teaching, yes, we hear that there are the 6 realms, there are hells, there are the hungry ghost beings, there are the animal realms. But we can also learn about how to avoid falling into the 3 evil realms. And this passage here in Sutra 788 summarizes what we need if we want to avoid that, and we want to be able to practice as a human life after life. So the important thing is developing and establishing our right views. Now, the second half of the verse mentions right livelihood. So what is right livelihood? Livelihood refers to the way we live. Whether we are a householder or a monastic, we all have to survive if we're living in this world. When our economic existence, such as our food, clothing, shelter, and travel needs, are all attained and used in a legal manner, this is what we regard as right livelihood. Now, a right and normal economic livelihood is very important for spiritual practitioners and Buddhist practitioners. The majority of unwholesome deeds stem from ill-gotten ways of maintaining one's economic livelihood. Now, as one who studies the Buddha Dharma and one who aspires to practice the Buddha Dharma, we must adopt a livelihood that abides by the laws of the country we live in, as well as being in accord with the Buddha Dharma's moral standards. So here, it is important to note that there are 2 conditions that we need to meet for right livelihood. One is that the occupation is legal by the laws of the country, and the other is that it does not contravene the Buddhist precepts. Now, the fundamental precepts that lay Buddhists should uphold is the 5 precepts. Remember that these precepts are what we vow to uphold when we take refuge in the Triple Gem. So with everything we do in life, we should measure it against the standard of the 5 precepts. For example, if one's career involves killing, such as being a butcher or a hunter, these occupations are legal, but they do not meet the moral standards of the Buddhist precepts. And then we move on to the precept of no stealing. Now, some may think, well, it's obvious stealing is always illegal, but there are some legal careers where stealing is part of the job. Can you think of any? So a hint would be, you know, a James Bond type role. So espionage, it's considered legal in the country where the person works, but probably not legal in the country where the information or the secrets are stolen from. But that is very obvious, you know. If we look at the way Hollywood has created the James Bond figure, it's considered quite special. But if we apply the Buddhist precepts to it, as a 007, 001 or whatever, as one of these characters, if you find yourself in this type of position, you've pretty much broken all 5 precepts. So next, we have the precept of no sexual misconduct. And in this case, any job relating to the sex industry should be avoided. 4th is the precept against lying. Now, it may be a bit unclear what type of legal job requires you to lie, but over our careers, as we do our jobs, we may find ourselves in situations where we're tempted to exaggerate things a little bit, or maybe make a project look better than it really is to attract investment, or maybe to just help ourselves keep our jobs or get that promotion, etc., etc. So these are things that we need to be mindful of when we do our jobs. And the last is the precept against drinking alcohol, which also includes taking other illegal intoxicants. Now, let us just focus on alcohol for this example. And it's quite a large industry, the wine-making industry, the alcohol industry. So whether you're making wine, spirits, beer, and so forth. And sometimes, you know, working in this industry can be considered very fascinating or very romantic even. And then apart from that, you've got the subsequent industries, the bars, the pubs, and the various drinking venues, which can also be seen as classy investments. If we uphold the 5 precepts well, and we have a proper understanding of cause and effect, then we should all steer clear of any part in this industry, from the growing of the grapes to the brewing, the bottling, the promotion, and the selling of alcohol. According to the Buddha Dharma, working in these fields that contravene any of the 5 precepts is considered wrong livelihood. And we should avoid careers in such industries and such companies and so forth, because the karma created will eventually create obstacles to our entrance and progression on the path of studying the Buddha Dharma. So this is important, particularly as householders, when you're looking for a job, especially when you're in a situation where, you know, you may be unemployed for quite some time and this job offer comes up, but it contradicts these 5 precepts. You know, this is when your right views are tested. How strong is your conviction? Are you willing to bend the rules, so to speak, just because you need that job, you need that money? So please understand, right view should bring across a strong conviction with a conscious selection towards wholesomeness as well. Now, right livelihood for householders and monastics is different. So for monastics, as long as our livelihood relies on the donations of followers, then this is considered right livelihood. However, if monastics try to earn a living through activities such as provision of medicine, unless it's on a charity basis, or if they undertake activities of fortune telling, astrology, or they may even devise ways to coax devotees to give them more money and so forth. These are all wrong livelihood for monastics. So even though you all are not monastics, but this can also help you gauge what you should and shouldn't do. So some people, if they hear, oh, that monk or that nun can tell the future, they can help you remove misfortunes and so forth. This sometimes attracts householders towards certain monastics. And in contrast, what this means is it's actually encouraging that monastic to continue with these type of activities, which are considered wrong livelihood for a monastic. So as a householder, apart from your own right livelihood, please also bear in mind to try and support monastics in their right livelihood and not encourage wrong livelihood. Now, when we gain our economic resources legally and morally, we also need to think about how to spend that wealth in a way that is not too lavish, but we should not be too stingy either. So this is right livelihood. It's being well balanced in how we earn that money and how we spend that money. So this means that if you earn more money, it's actually okay to enjoy more luxuries. But don't forget to use part of your wealth to practice generosity. Now, in terms of the Noble Eightfold Path, right livelihood corresponds to the path of right speech, right action, and right livelihood. Now, only when we choose a livelihood that accords with the Buddha Dharma, then we are on the right track. Otherwise, we may not be able to save ourselves in this life, let alone entertain the idea of ending cyclic existence for good. Now, one story to highlight this is during the initial period of the Japanese invasion of China, there was a lay Buddhist in Hong Kong, and he was a devoted practitioner of the Pure Land practice. Now, this particular Buddhist had a large and quiet villa, and he invited a very prominent monk back at that time, Venerable Yin-Guang, to leave the conflict area in China, in mainland China, and to reside at his villa in Hong Kong. Now, Venerable Yin-Guang inquired about the householder's background and found out that his family's main business was a wine brewing business. So Venerable Yin-Guang said that he would only accept the invitation if the householder gave up that winery business. Now, needless to say, back then, that business was very lucrative and the householder was not willing to give up such a livelihood. So Venerable Yin-Guang basically refused to leave for that villa. So this clearly shows what is right view and what is wrong livelihood. Learning the Buddha Dharma while not engaging in right livelihood is likely to be a contributor to the decline of Chinese Buddhism. When we learn the Buddha Dharma, our livelihood should and must accord with the laws and precepts. So much so that one would rather endure temporary pains of changing their careers instead of remaining in a wrong livelihood long term. Now, having such determination and carrying out such actions are only possible if we have right view. And what right view is this? It's the view that having a wrong livelihood will bring harm to oneself and others. So this situation is quite common. I've had people that I know who works for companies that basically contravene the 5 precepts, even though these companies are quite large and quite successful businesses in a economic and finance sense. So it's quite tempting. It's very tempting, particularly when your economic situation requires money to live off, that you may think, oh, I'll just stay in this job for a while until I find another one. But at times, you need to think, is it worth it? Is the karma created worth it? Or should you follow the Buddha's teachings properly and cut it right then and there? So it's really important as a Buddhist practitioner to really reflect on how strong are your views concerning the teachings in the Buddha Dharma, and how well have you applied it in your daily life. So the first verse mentions the need to establish right view. Now, the next question then becomes, what does right view refer to specifically? And this is addressed in the following verse, which begins with a half verse that says, what is this above mentioned right views? It is the right insight into human existence. So in terms of our human worldly right view, this is referring to a correct understanding about human existence. We should investigate the meaning of our human existence and the right path that humans should follow. Only by undertaking proper investigation can we establish a view of human existence that becomes strong and unwavering. And this view will then guide us in terms of our actions and our choices whenever we're faced with decisions. So for a practitioner of the Buddha Dharma, having right view is critical. And this is just like how a ship needs its rudder and compass. Now, the Buddha once said that possessing right view is rare, and this is especially so among lay Buddhists. Some people believe in the Triple Gem sincerely, and they enjoy engaging in charitable deeds, and they spend a lot of their time reading the Buddhist sutras. Now, such a person may appear to be a model of a good Buddhist disciple. However, some of these people, when they grow old, they may end up listening to some nonsense by their good friends or their neighbors and so forth. And so, for the sake of treating some nutritional deficiency, they may once again choose to engage in the act of killing by abandoning their decades of vegetarianism. And then there can be some people who develop an illness that is incurable, and so they resort to the gods or divination or mediums or any other religion and practices. Basically, for the sake of a cure, they're willing to try anything. And then there are also some whose financial situation may turn bad, and they seek out the god of wealth for help. Or they try to win the lottery by praying to certain deities. And I've even heard of some people that will go and buy a lottery ticket and then put the lottery ticket as you would put fruits and offerings on a plate and place it on the Buddhist altar, they would place their lottery ticket there in the hopes that the Buddha will bless that ticket to win and bring them a lottery win. So at times when people become desperate, there are things that they can do which, when life is smooth, they will never consider doing. So some of these people have been diligently practicing Buddhism, but for some reason in their later years, maybe due to attachments to their body, their lifestyle, and so forth, when the situation goes pear-shaped, they start to question their practice and they start to seek alternative methods. So these are examples of practitioners who have not established right view, or their views are weak and incomplete. So that's one of the main reasons why they are unable to establish their conviction and make that conviction steadfast and unwavering. So the result is that when their bodies age, when external conditions become unfavorable, their intentions or their determination also starts to waver. So if we are sincere about learning the Buddha Dharma, and we want to end cyclic existence and attain enlightenment, or even if we're simply choosing the human vehicle or the heavenly vehicle, and we want to become a human again in the next life, but be born with good conditions, we must first establish our right views about this human existence, and then we can start to think about other goals. So the verses continue and says, whether one's thoughts are pure or impure, whether one's actions benefit or harm others, whether one's behavior is wholesome or unwholesome, disciples of the Buddha should self-inspect honestly. So this verse begins the detailed outline of the contents of right views. In the Buddha Dharma, the worldly right view about our human existence is presented using certain terms in the sutras, and Venerable Yin-Shun has grouped these into 4 general categories. The first category of right view concerns wholesomeness and unwholesomeness. That means we should affirm that our behaviors does have aspects that are wholesome and unwholesome, whether it is our speech, our physical actions, or our mental activities. In other words, in our lives, we have the aspects of ethical and unethical behavior, moral and immoral conduct. The Buddha Dharma's right view begins with clearly seeing that in this world and in the transcendental world, it is founded on these. There is a foundation, and this foundation is ethical standards. If we were to staunchly reject ethics, then what we will have is wrong views. And an example of people who may reject ethical standards are those who may doubt philosophy or those who advocate pure materialist theories. So what exactly is wholesome and unwholesome? In terms of our own state of mind, pure mental activities are regarded as wholesome, while impure mental activities are unwholesome. Now, in our minds, we possess both wholesomeness and unwholesomeness. So we have pure elements and impure elements. The impure elements includes things such as our vexations, our afflictions, and our defilements. When such impure defilements are inactive and the mind gives rise to pure elements, then this is what we call wholesome. So the mind state that we consider wholesome is one that doesn't have any greed, doesn't have any hatred or ignorance. So when we talk about wholesome mind state in this particular context, it means that no greed, no hatred, and no ignorance is what is dominant at that point in time. So the opposite, when our mind is in an unwholesome state, in an impure state, it means there are the activities of greed or hatred or ignorance that are bubbling and stirring. So a specific example of a mind state that is wholesome, that is pure, is when we esteem the noble, wholesome actions of the sages, or when we have shame, when we have remorse, when we feel adverse to violence and evil, or when our mental activities of faith can cause our mind to settle down in purity, such that we can then become diligent when it comes to stopping unwholesome actions and undertaking good deeds. So these are all examples of mind states that are wholesome, and they can stir our actions and speech to also become wholesome. So, of course, if we flip that around, is when we don't have any shame and we don't have any remorse, or we don't have any faith, or if we're lazy about engaging in good deeds, then these are times when our mind state is unwholesome and we have impurities. So it's important to remember that as a human being, we have both. We are capable of wholesomeness and unwholesomeness. So all our mental activities have aspects of being pure and wholesome and aspects of being impure and unwholesome. Now, when we talk about pure and impure in this sense, it's still relating to the worldly realm. So there are times when you will read certain scriptures and you will read about the notions of purity and impurity. And sometimes when they talk about impure and pure, the definition is defined by worldly and transcendental states. So in such situations, the transcendental state is considered pure and the worldly state is considered impure. So that means, under that definition, the worldly state is impure regardless of whether the deed is good or bad. So just remember, what I'm talking about over the next few days when we talk about pure and impure is still within the worldly realm. But just to let you know, because I think in Venerable Tangzi's talk, there is mention of pure and impure, and under that situation, the definition is divided by worldly and transcendental states. So this is just to let you know, when you read the Buddha Dharma, there may be one set of terms, but the definition for that set of term will vary depending on the subject at hand. Now, in terms of our views and behaviors and their influence on others, when the outcome benefits others, then this is considered wholesome. In contrast, if the outcome harms others, then this is considered unwholesome. So this is another way to gauge what is wholesome and what is unwholesome, what is pure and what is impure. We need to know that we have a relationship with people and other sentient beings in this world. So we should work together to mutually support and help each other while upholding the principles of harmonious coexistence. Now, if our actions causes harm to others, even if there is a benefit to ourselves, then such behavior is considered unwholesome, and we should not carry that deed out. Conversely, if the action benefits others while we suffer a loss, then such behavior is considered wholesome, and we should try and carry out that deed if it is within our means. So what this means is that at some times, for the sake of benefiting others, we need to sacrifice a bit ourselves. But when we make the decision to do that, that is wholesome. However, we need to also measure our own ability. Can we bear this sacrifice? It's no use carrying out the deed, carrying out the sacrifice, and then you think, darn it, I shouldn't have done that. Because as soon as we have that type of a thought, what was wholesome becomes unwholesome. So as you can see in the table, as long as it benefits others, then it's wholesome. But when you choose to benefit others at your own cost, you need to also make sure you take care of your own mental state and make sure that you don't then become resentful about having made that sacrifice. So whether one's behavior is wholesome or unwholesome is determined by our internal mind state and the external effect on others. So behavior refers to all of our actions, and our internal actions include our mental activities. Our external actions include our bodily actions and our speech. So all these types of actions can have aspects that are wholesome or unwholesome. So we need to be mindful of that. But having said that, when we do enter states of unwholesomeness, when your mind does dwell on vexations and unhappy thoughts and unhappy emotions, don't get too upset with yourself either. Don't beat yourself down and say, I'm a Buddhist, I shouldn't be this way. You also need to treat yourself with a bit of patience and tolerance. You know, when you think about the Buddhist practice, it's not just about helping others. The main thing is also to help oneself. As long as you can help yourself, then you will be able to help others. So as a disciple of the Buddha, especially for monastics who assume the responsibility of preserving the Dharma, we need to carefully and honestly observe and inspect all of these aspects of wholesomeness and unwholesomeness in ourselves. And as Buddhists, we must develop conviction that there exists these aspects of wholesomeness and unwholesomeness. And in addition, we must be able to distinguish, to discern what is wholesome and what is unwholesome, and make sure that our behaviors, in terms of our behaviors, we make the right decisions to carry out wholesome behaviors and to abstain from unwholesome behaviors. And we can only do this when we establish our right views, and a right view that is steadfast and unwavering, because only with right view can it provide us with the standard that guides all of our mental activities, and our mental activities will then flow through to our physical and verbal activities. So given the time, I think I'll end today's lesson here, because The next is a new verse talking about karma and its results, which is the second type of right view. So we've got a few minutes left, I think. Does anyone have any questions?
I I have some questions about like right livelihood. Does that include, do they have this idea of like usury in Buddhism or predatory lending and high interest rates and stuff like that?
Yeah, yeah. So this is a finance question.
I guess.
Yeah. So can you explain the situation a bit more clearly so that everyone also has a better understanding of what the conditions are?
I guess there's, well, usury is actually a very old concept, especially in, I guess, Judeo-Christian culture, was where you're charging very high interest rates for debt,
Mm.
and you basically prey on people's need for money. So you, some, it's like kind of think of loan sharking.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's another
So
way.
there's a,
And
yep.
yeah, and predatory lending is a little more complicated. It's things like offering loans that are initially have very good terms and conditions, but later on there's probably um, like unclear or tricky aspects of the loan where the interest rate can go much higher.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
that was a problem in the U.S. during um, like our various financial housing bubbles.
Yes.
So,
Yes. Yeah. No, we've also had that problem here. And the simple answer is if you can avoid that, okay, particularly if you're working in a bank. I can understand that, if you're working in a bank and you're being pushed by your managers and so forth to promote these products. So you didn't create these products, someone higher up thought of these products, but you being lower down and, the face to face with the customers. If you're being asked to promote these products, I would say that you really need to be careful. You can be very, you can do your job by just mentioning, to people as they come and say, oh, do you need a loan? We have these products, but then just stop there. So in a sense, you've done your job. You did promote the product, but the customer didn't want it because uh, you can even say that you're not very good at marketing, but you need to know that such products are deceptive. And this goes back to the aspect where I mentioned about, lying by making a product look prettier, more attractive, and by just pointing out some of its benefits, but not really explaining clearly the potential pitfalls and so forth. Because most people who take out these types of loan are not equipped with the financial prowess, the economic understanding to make a proper judgment about whether they are willing to take on that risk. So the average, mum and dad investor or banking client, they don't read the fine print. To be honest, probably most, unless you're a lawyer, most other financial background people don't read the fine print word for word and in detail either. So if you can avoid it, I would definitely say to do so, because such products are aimed from a capitalist point of view just to make money, but they don't have any compassion for the people who may end up in the pitfalls or the trappings of these products. So the best thing is to, I would assume that you wouldn't be coming up with these products yourself. But if you're caught in a situation where you have to promote those products, you do need to think about can you talk to your supervisor, maybe change your roles so that you don't have any dealings with these products? Otherwise, if you have to promote the products, then you promote the pitfalls. You make sure that the client knows exactly what the risks are, and you can give them, modeling choices and say, okay, under this product, if in the first year you may benefit by this much because the interest rates now are low. But if in the next year interest rate goes up, and then you may give them the hint that, the central bank is likely to hike interest rates exponentially. And so the situation is like this, and you could be facing, a doubling, tripling of your debt. Make sure that they know what they're in for potentially. And if they're willing to then accept that risk after you've done your best to highlight the problems, then it's their choice. Do you know what I
Okay.
mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think it's time. So
Yep.
3 bows to the Buddha. First bow. Second bow. Third bow. And bow to the teacher.
Thank you, everyone, for your time today.
Thank you. Do
Thank
anybody have
you.
any